When I walked through the front door of my parents' house that afternoon, I never expected to hear my name whispered like a dirty secret. I'd come by unannounced, arms full of groceries, thinking I'd surprise them with their favorite pasta for dinner, the kind Mom used to make when I was a kid. But as I stepped inside, I froze, hearing their voices carry from the living room. "I just don't know how much longer we can keep pretending," my father said, his voice lower than usual. "Allie is a pathetic disappointment. She may pay the bills, but that doesn't make up for her being a failure in every other way." My heart stopped. I almost dropped the grocery bags right there. I could hear the soft clinking of teacups as my mother replied, utterly calm. "Well, at least her money keeps us comfortable. She knows she owes us for everything we've done for her. It's the least she can do." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I stood motionless, staring at the hallway wall as if it could somehow explain why my parents, the very people I had worked so hard to support, were tearing me apart behind my back. Every word felt like a dagger, reopening old wounds I thought I had long since healed. I'd always known they weren't the most affectionate parents. My achievements had never been enough. No promotion was ever impressive enough, no gesture generous enough. But this wasn't criticism. This was contempt. I slowly backed out of the door, careful not to make a sound. The groceries were still in my car, forgotten. I drove home in silence, my mind racing with fragments of their conversation. Pathetic disappointment. At least her money keeps us comfortable. Those words echoed like cruel chants. I couldn't stop hearing them. For the past 5 years, I had quietly paid for nearly everything. Their mortgage, utilities, even their vacations. After my father's construction business went under and my mother retired early due to stress, I stepped up. I was 26 when I took on the responsibility, working my way up as a project manager at a tech firm, pulling overtime, living below my means. Also, my parents could keep the house I grew up in, enjoy dinners out, and never worry about bills. They had no idea how much I sacrificed. And yet, there they were, sitting in the home I paid for, ridiculing me. That evening, I sat on my couch staring at the financial spreadsheet I updated religiously. Every dollar spent, every bill covered. I scrolled through the numbers, and for the first time, I didn't feel proud. I felt like a fool. I kept replaying the scene in my head, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about someone else. Maybe it was out of context. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But I knew better. Deep down, I had always felt like their support was conditional. They only saw value in me when I was handing them money. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth surfacing. The next morning, I woke up hoping it was all a bad dream, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. I spent the whole day at work struggling to focus, fighting the urge to just drive back to their house and demand an explanation. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I needed answers. I couldn't go another day pretending everything was fine. So I called them. My father answered on the second ring. "Allie, sweetheart," he said, the usual warm facade in place. I took a shaky breath. "Dad, I heard what you said yesterday," I began, my voice barely steady. "I was there. I heard you both." There was a long pause on the line. Then, to my disbelief, my mother grabbed the phone and laughed. Not nervously, but genuinely, as if I had just told a joke. "Well," she said, voice sharp, "it's true, isn't it? You've never lived up to what we expected. You owe us everything, Allie. You know that." That was it. At that exact moment, something inside me shifted. Years of guilt, obligation, and blind loyalty dissolved like sugar in hot water. I didn't even hang up. I simply set the phone down on the table and sat there in silence. The house felt colder. Empty. But for once, the silence wasn't unbearable. It was liberating. For the first time, I knew what I had to do. The next few days passed in a fog. I went through the motions, work, errands, emails, but it was as if I was watching someone else live my life. The only thing that felt real was the echo of my mother's laughter in those words. You owe us everything. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every sacrifice I had made since I was 26. The times I'd skipped vacations, said no to friends, worked 60-hour weeks. Also, my parents could live comfortably without fear of losing their home. Every birthday present, every dinner I treated them to, every utility bill quietly paid. I hadn't been helping out of obligation. I did it out of love. But love, apparently, was a one-way street. On the third night, I found myself scrolling through old emails and texts, reading past conversations with them. It wasn't the first time they had dismissed me, belittled me, or made me feel like less. It was just the first time I had really heard it. My mother's passive-aggressive remarks about my small promotion at work. My father's jokes about how at least Thomas would have stayed to help with the family business, even though Thomas, my brother, hadn't spoken to them in years. I had been blind, excusing it all under the banner of that's just how they are. But hearing them call me a disappointment, without knowing I was listening, stripped away every illusion. This wasn't just how they were. This was how they truly felt. By the end of the week, I had made a quiet but firm decision. I was done. I wasn't going to make a scene or beg for their love. I wasn't even going to confront them again. They had shown me who they were, and this time I believed them. I opened my budgeting app and canceled every automatic payment linked to their accounts. Mortgage, utilities, credit cards, even the prepaid cell phone plan I had been quietly covering since Dad's business collapsed. I stared at the screen as the confirmation emails rolled in. It felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't their ATM. I was just me. That night, I called my closest friend, Eva. She had always warned me that my parents took advantage of me, but I had stubbornly defended them. When I told her what happened, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just listened, then said gently, "Allie, you don't have to keep paying for people who don't even see you." I cried harder than I had in years. The next morning, as if the universe could sense the shift, I got a text from my mother. "Sweetheart, we've noticed a few things aren't going through this month. Did you change banks? Call me when you get a chance." No apology, no acknowledgement of what they said. Just business as usual. I didn't reply. A few hours later, Dad tried. "Hey, Allie, your mom's worried. Some payments are missing. Can you check?" Still no apology. Just a concern about their precious payments. I let the message sit there, unread. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve them. Over the next few days, I got more texts, voicemails, and even an email from my dad, the man who hated technology, titled, "Urgent, please respond." Each message grew slightly more frantic. "Allie, we're just worried about you. Did you forget the mortgage? We know you're busy with work. Please don't be stubborn. We need to talk." I wasn't being stubborn. I was being free. When Sunday came, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took the entire day for myself. No errands, no work emails, no family obligations. I went to the park, brought a book I hadn't had time to read, and just existed. It felt strange at first, like I was forgetting something important. But slowly, it started to feel right. The text didn't stop, though. That evening, as I sat by the lake watching the sunset, I got another message from Mom. This time it read, "Call us when you can." We didn't mean it. I stared at those words for a long time. We didn't mean it. Did they think this was just about words? That I could unhear them calling me a failure? That I could forget the years of dismissiveness, the entitlement, the conditional love? They hadn't just slipped up in the heat of the moment. They said those things when they thought I wasn't listening. When they were relaxed, honest, unfiltered. I closed my phone without replying. They meant every word they said. And now so did I. I thought the silence would bring me guilt. I expected the sleepless nights, the urge to apologize even when I knew I had done nothing wrong. That was the pattern I had fallen into for years. They would push, I would bend. They would hurt me and I would find a way to forgive them just to keep the peace. But the silence didn't bring guilt. It brought relief. Days turned into a week, and still, I didn't respond. I ignored every text, call, and voicemail. I watched as their tone shifted from concerned to irritated, and eventually to desperate. By the second week, my mother's messages were sounding more frantic. "Allie, why aren't you answering? Your father and I are worried sick. We've been good to you. Don't throw away your family over one silly misunderstanding. The mortgage is late and the bank is calling. Please, sweetheart." There it was. The real reason behind their concern. Not me. Not my well-being. But the mortgage. The money. Every time I saw their messages, I could almost hear their voices as they sat comfortably in the house I paid for, still believing they were entitled to everything I had built. Still pretending that the words they said meant nothing. Still thinking that throwing around the word family would automatically grant them forgiveness. But I didn't feel forgiving. I felt betrayed. Eva invited me over that Friday night. She made tea, knowing I hadn't been sleeping much. We sat on her couch, surrounded by candles and soft music, a sharp contrast to the turmoil inside me. "I don't know how to explain it," I confessed, holding the warm mug in both hands. "It's like I'm grieving them, but they're still alive." Eva nodded, understanding instantly. "You are. You're grieving the parents you thought you had, or hoped they could be." I blinked back tears. She was right. I had spent years hoping they would change, that the next time I helped them, the next time I sacrificed, it would finally be enough to make them proud. But it never was. And it never would be. "They said it so easily, Ava, like it wasn't even the first time," I whispered. "Like they'd been saying it all along when I wasn't around." "You deserve better," she said firmly. "And you know it." I did. And the strange thing was, realizing it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It felt necessary. The next day, I checked my emails and found one that made my stomach drop. "Final notice. Mortgage payment overdue. Immediate action required." I stared at it, realizing that for the first time in years, my parents were facing the consequences of their own choices, and I wasn't swooping in to save them. An hour later, another voicemail came through from my father. His voice was sharp now, no longer pretending. "Allie, I don't know what this little stunt is about, but you need to get over whatever nonsense you've conjured up. Your mother and I are under a lot of stress. You're making things harder than they need to be. Call us." I couldn't help but laugh. After everything, I was the one causing stress? Later that evening, my mother called again. This time, she didn't even bother hiding her frustration. "We raised you better than this," she snapped. "Ignoring us, letting the mortgage lapse? We didn't mean what we said. You know how your father gets when he's frustrated? And I was just joking. Stop being so sensitive and call us back." Sensitive. The word hit harder than I expected. They had always used it to dismiss me. Every hurt feeling, every boundary I tried to set was labeled as me being too sensitive. But I wasn't sensitive. I was done. I closed my eyes and pictured them sitting in the living room, panicking as they received calls from the bank. I could almost hear my father blaming my mother blaming me, both too proud to admit the truth. That without me, they couldn't afford the life they'd built. And I was okay with that. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly. On Sunday, Eva and I went for brunch. As we sat on the patio watching people pass by, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. "Allie, we didn't mean it. Please just call us. We need you." But this time there was something different about it. It wasn't just desperation, it was fear. And somehow that didn't bother me. It almost felt fair. Eva noticed me staring at my phone. "Are you going to answer them?" I shook my head. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew. This was just the beginning. By the end of the second month, the silence was no longer something I feared. It was something I owned. My parents, on the other hand, were unraveling. I could see it in the frequency of their calls, the increasingly frantic voicemails, The passive-aggressive emails that piled up like junk mail I never asked for. They couldn't understand why I wasn't rushing in to save them like I always had. Why wasn't their good little daughter stepping up to patch the cracks they had long pretended didn't exist? They weren't used to this version of me, the version that didn't bend. Ava noticed it too. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as we walked through the park, leaves crunching beneath our feet. "Like you're finally breathing." "I am," I admitted. "For the first time, I don't feel like I owe anyone anything." Still, part of me wondered when the real panic would start. The mortgage wasn't just overdue. It was on the verge of foreclosure. The bank had likely already begun the process, and knowing my parents, they'd been ignoring the calls until it became impossible. That impossibility arrived the next day. My phone rang while I was at work. I ignored it like I had every call from them lately, but when I checked the voicemail later, my father's voice sounded different. Tight. Desperate. "Allie, please. The bank. We're losing the house. They've started foreclosure proceedings. We didn't mean what we said. We were just upset. It wasn't about you. Please, just call us." I stared at the screen, unmoved. It was about me. It had always been about me. About their disappointment that I wasn't who they wanted me to be. About their entitlement to everything I had worked for. The fact that they only reached out now when they were drowning financially told me everything I needed to know. Later that night, as I scrolled mindlessly through social media, I got another message. This time from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Aunt Carol. Your mom is a mess, Allie. Just call her. Family sticks together." I clenched my jaw. Family sticks together. The phrase that had been weaponized against me my entire life. But family, I realized, didn't mean enabling. It didn't mean sacrificing yourself so others could thrive while calling you a disappointment. I didn't reply. Days passed. More relatives started reaching out. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions about how I should forgive and forget. Each one pleaded their case, but none of them knew the full story. They hadn't heard the words that I had. They hadn't sat alone on their couch, listening to their parents label them as nothing more than a wallet with feelings. When I didn't respond, the guilt campaign shifted into threats. It started small. My father emailed me a link to a local article about how difficult it was for people over 60 to find affordable housing, underlined with, "Is this what you really want for your parents?" Then my mother took it a step further. "If you don't help us, people will know. Your friends, your boss. Do you want them to know how selfish you are? After all we've done for you?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I hadn't expected them to go there. To threaten my reputation. And yet, deep down, I wasn't surprised. This was who they really were, when the mask finally slipped. I forwarded the email to Eva without a word. She called me immediately. "Allie, you need to protect yourself. Don't let them twist this around." "I won't," I said, steady. "Not this time." I pulled up my employee portal and began gathering everything I needed. Pay stubs, emails, even performance reviews. I wasn't naive. If they were willing to smear me to family, they might try to reach further. I wasn't going to let them. By the end of the week, another message arrived from my mother, this time sounding less like a threat and more like a plea. "We didn't mean it, Allie. We were stressed. It was a bad day. Please don't let this ruin everything. You're our daughter. You're supposed to help us." But their words didn't touch me anymore. The damage had been done. Not just with what they said that day, but with every little dismissal, every expectation that I'd fund their lives, every guilt trip, and every moment I'd spent thinking I was the problem. They could dress it up however they wanted now, but the truth was simple. I wasn't their safety net anymore. And whether they wanted to admit it or not, they were about to fall. The final unraveling came faster than I expected. A week after their last desperate voicemail, I got a call from Aunt Carol again. This time, she sounded frantic. "Allie, they're losing the house. They only have a few weeks left before it's auctioned. Your father is beside himself, and your mother, she's in tears. Please, you have to step in. I listened quietly, staring at the ceiling as I lay on my couch. The version of me from months ago would have been pacing the room, heart pounding, scrambling to figure out how to save them. But now, I felt detached. Sad, yes, but also certain. I had already stepped in. For years, I had saved them from this exact scenario more times than I could count. But instead of gratitude, they gave me disdain. Aunt Carol, I said carefully, I'm sorry, but I'm not getting involved. There was silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. Allie, they're still your parents. They made mistakes, sure, but family is family. I know, I said. And that's why I gave them more than I ever should have. But I can't keep sacrificing myself for people who only love me when it's convenient. Before she could reply, I ended the call. I wasn't ready to hear the familiar chorus of, but they're family anymore. I had played that record too many times. Over the next few days, the situation spiraled. I started receiving emails directly from the bank, likely because I was still listed as a prior point of contact. The house was officially in foreclosure. Notices had been posted on the property. I imagined my parents, shocked to find the familiar red-lettered paper pinned to their front door. Part of me felt guilty, but guilt had been my default for too long. Instead, I reminded myself of the countless times I'd pulled them back from the edge, only to be rewarded with sneers behind my back. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had shown me their true colors. Then came the message that made my stomach turn. Allie, my father wrote in a cold, clipped email, if you don't fix this, you'll regret it. You owe us. We're your parents, and you don't get to abandon us like this. Remember who paid for your education. Remember who raised you. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the sheer audacity. They didn't pay for my education. I had. I'd worked 2 jobs, taken student loans, and when my parents' checks bounced during my junior year of college, I covered the shortfall myself. I had never even asked them to repay me. I scrolled through my archived emails and pulled up the payment receipts, proof of every dime I had scraped together to stay in school. I sat there in stunned silence, realizing just how deeply they had rewritten history to suit their narrative. They never paid for me. They never really supported me. The next day, the final straw arrived. A voicemail left by my mother, voice trembling between tears and anger. I hope you're happy, Allie. We're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, it's all falling apart. Is that what you wanted? For your parents to be homeless? You're pathetic, just like we always said. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Not because they were new, but because they were familiar. This wasn't new behavior. This was just the first time I wasn't numbing myself enough to ignore it. They weren't sorry for what they said. They were sorry for the consequences. I played the voicemail for Eva that evening, tears rolling silently down my face. You don't deserve this, she whispered. This isn't love, Allie. This is manipulation. I nodded. I knew she was right. And as painful as it was, the final piece of my decision settled into place. I wouldn't save them. I wasn't just withdrawing my money. I was done being their scapegoat. 2 days later, another email came, short and panicked. Please, Allie, we didn't mean it. Just help us this one last time. We're begging you. I stared at the message for a long time, but I didn't reply. Instead, I quietly began preparing something I should have done a long time ago. Protecting myself, legally and emotionally. Because whether they realized it or not, their safety net was officially gone. And this time, they were going to hit the ground. The day the house officially went into foreclosure, there was no fanfare, no dramatic showdown, no heartfelt apology. Just a sterile notification email from the bank stating the inevitable. The property would be auctioned within 30 days unless the outstanding balance was paid in full. I knew they couldn't pay it. Without me, they were exposed to reality. The reality I had been shielding them from for years. I thought I would feel some sort of satisfaction, watching everything fall apart. But the truth was, it wasn't satisfying. It was just quiet. a quiet I hadn't known since I was a child. For once, I wasn't frantically solving someone else's problems. A few days later, Eva and I went out for coffee. She slid a manila folder across the table. "I spoke to a lawyer, like you asked," she said. "Everything's ready. If they try anything, smear your name, show up at work, or harass you, you're covered." I nodded, staring at the folder without opening it. The heaviness in my chest was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't fear or guilt anymore. It was simply the weight of moving on. I finally said it out loud. "They're going to lose the house." Eva didn't flinch. They chose this. And deep down, I knew it was true. The next call came the following weekend. This time it was my father, and his voice was unrecognizable, cracked, broken, nothing like the intimidating figure I had grown up with. "Allie, please, please don't do this. We didn't mean it. You know we didn't mean it. We were upset, we were stressed, but we need you. We need you." For a brief second, I almost answered. The part of me that still craved their approval. The child in me who wanted her parents to finally love her the way she had always wanted. Almost picked up that phone. But I didn't. Because I finally understood. They hadn't reached out to apologize after hurting me. They reached out when the money stopped. They didn't need me. They needed what I gave them. I spent the rest of the day boxing up old family photo albums, cards, trinkets, things I had kept out of some sense of loyalty. But as I placed them in a donation pile, I realized something. All these years, I thought cutting ties with them would leave me empty. Instead, I felt lighter with every box I sealed. 2 weeks later, the house was officially listed for auction. Word spread fast. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years flooded my phone. "How could you abandon your parents like this? They sacrificed so much for you. This is unforgivable." Each message tried to pull me back into the role I had always played. The peacemaker, the fixer, the obedient daughter who took care of everyone but herself. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. The real turning point came when my mother herself showed up at my office building. I watched her from the safety of the security cameras as she pleaded with the receptionist to let her upstairs. When security escorted her out, she looked around frantically as if searching for someone to make it all stop. It wasn't me. Later that afternoon, I found a handwritten note taped to the windshield of my car. "Please, Allie, we can fix this. Don't do this to your family." I folded the note carefully and threw it in the trash. On the night before the auction, I sat on the floor of my apartment, sipping tea, staring at the city lights beyond my window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I simply felt free. Eva called. "They're still trying to reach you," she said gently. "You okay?" "I am," I replied. And for the first time, I meant it. The house sold the next morning to a young couple who looked ecstatic as they held the keys. I watched the announcement online, knowing that chapter of my life had closed. My parents moved into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. I didn't know the details. I didn't ask. I only knew what little I heard through others. And I didn't need to know more. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about finally choosing me. 3 months later, standing in my quiet apartment, surrounded by my own furniture, my own peace, and my own rules, I realized something. I hadn't lost my family. They had lost me. And strangely enough, that was the most empowering thing I had ever done. Sometimes walking away isn't about punishment. It's about survival. And I had survived. He didn't even raise his voice at first, just stared across the conference table, lips curling like he'd been waiting for this moment all morning. "Apologize to my son, or you're done here." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through the fluorescent hum. I looked around. 15 people from finance, 3 from audit, 2 interns. Every one of them froze. You could practically hear the coffee cups stop midair. His son Nathan sat to his right, fresh out of grad school, perfect hair, confidence of someone who'd never once been told no. He smirked, tapping a pen against the report I'd spent 2 weeks cleaning up after his errors. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that silence has a weight of its own. The CFO, Richard Holt, leaned forward. Well? I met his eyes. For what exactly? He turned red, the kind of red that comes from ego, not anger. For disrespecting Nathan during yesterday's review. For undermining him in front of his team, I smiled, slow and steady. You mean when I pointed out that your son's streamlined forecast forgot to include payroll tax obligations for Q3? The room stayed silent, but I caught the small flicker in a junior analyst's eyes. The kind that says, "Please stop talking before this gets worse." Richard slammed his hand on the table. You think you're untouchable because you've been here 12 years. But this department runs on respect, Anna, and you just lost yours. Nathan finally spoke. Maybe next time, keep your comments to yourself. Some of us are trying to modernize this place. Modernize. I echoed softly. That's what you call deleting half of the compliance formulas? He shrugged. Too complicated. People like simplicity. People like lies, I thought. But I said nothing. Richard leaned back, pretending composure. You have until 5 to apologize, or you can clean out your desk. And that was it. The public verdict. In front of the entire floor. No warning, no chance to explain, just an order to bow to nepotism or leave. I gathered my notes quietly, nodded once, and said, Understood. He mistook that for surrender. They always do. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. Instead, I reread my employment contract, line by line like a bedtime story. 12 years of loyalty condensed into 22 pages of clauses and fine print. And then, on page 19, subsection D. In the event of termination without cause, employee retains full rights to all internally developed compliance software and frameworks authored independently. I almost laughed. They'd never noticed it. Back when I first joined, I'd been a contractor, hired to stabilize the company's internal audit automation. When they converted me to full-time, they reused the same contract template and never deleted that clause. 12 years later, it still stood. By morning, my decision was already made. The office was buzzing with whispered pity when I walked in. People glanced up, then quickly looked away, pretending to check emails. Nathan was already in the break room, bragging about how he'd handled the compliance dinosaur. I passed him without a word. At 9:03 a.m., Richard appeared in my doorway. He looked smug, rested. Hope you learned your lesson, he said. I smiled. I did. I handed him the printed resignation letter. Crisp, folded once. He barely glanced at it before smirking. Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before embarrassing my son. He turned to leave, but the door hadn't even shut when a voice shouted down the hall. Sir, you did what? It was Marianne, the company's legal counsel. Her heels clattered like gunfire as she rushed in, waving a folder. Please tell me you didn't just accept Anna's resignation. Richard blinked. She quit. What's the problem? Marianne's eyes darted between us. Oh my God, she whispered. You just voided the proprietary software rights. All of our audit automation tools, her frameworks, those belong to her now. The room went so still I could hear the air conditioning click. Richard's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Everything she built is company property. I raised an eyebrow. Not according to Section 12D. He froze. I could see him replaying every moment, every word from yesterday, every smirk. Realization was starting to crawl up his spine like cold water. Marianne flipped open the folder, tapping the highlighted section. She's right. It's still active. You never amended her contract. She owns the compliance architecture. Richard stared at me, pale now. You're bluffing." I leaned back in my chair. "Then feel free to delete it. Let's see how long the system lasts." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or slam doors. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a smile, a clause no one ever read, and the kind of calm that makes people nervous. As Marianne kept talking, I picked up my coffee. The same cheap break room brew I'd sipped through layoffs, mergers, and budget cuts, and took one slow drink. The taste hadn't changed in 12 years, but everything else had. That morning, I walked out of that building for the last time. No tears, no speech, just silence. And a system that was about to remind them exactly who built its bones. They thought I was leaving. I was only getting started. When you leave a company after 12 years, people expect some kind of goodbye. A cake, a speech, maybe a tear or two in the parking lot. I gave them nothing. Just silence and a half smile that lingered longer than it should have. That night, I cleaned my home office. 12 years of files, backups, and audit notes neatly archived on an external drive I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was protecting what was mine. The compliance framework I'd built, Sentinel, wasn't just a program. It was a living system. Automated risk mapping, audit trails, and cross-checks that had saved the company from 3 separate fines. Every log still ran through a license I owned. When they made me apologize to their prodigy, they didn't just insult me. They fired their firewall. By Monday, my inbox was flooded. Not from the company. Those accounts had been deactivated. But from old colleagues using personal emails. "Anna, something's off. The audit console is blank. Can you check the validation tool?" "It's crashing." I didn't respond. They'd figure it out eventually. At 10:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened. "Anna, it's Marianne. Please call me back. Urgent." Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was scared. By noon, the rumors had reached me through LinkedIn messages and quiet text threads. The quarterly compliance sync had failed mid-meeting. Nathan's fancy, streamlined dashboard was displaying red error codes instead of financial metrics. The CFO had apparently lost his composure in front of the board. A few analysts messaged me privately. "Did you do something?" I didn't answer, because the truth was I hadn't done anything. Yet. See, Sentinel wasn't vindictive. It was obedient. It was built to follow one simple rule. Maintain operational integrity unless license ownership changes. When Richard accepted my resignation without legal transfer, the system automatically entered restricted mode. That meant read-only access, no updates, no exports, no external syncing. In plain English, frozen. It wasn't revenge. It was protocol. Around 2 p.m., Marianne called again. I picked up this time. "Anna, we need to talk," she said quickly. "The system locked everyone out. The license is reading owner authorization required. It says your credentials are still listed as primary." I sipped my tea. "That's correct." She exhaled. "Can we meet? Maybe we can negotiate a handover?" "I'm not unreasonable," I said softly. "But I'm not a fool either. You and I both know that framework is my intellectual property." "I understand," she said carefully. "But the CFO, he's saying you intentionally sabotaged?" I cut her off. "Marianne, don't finish that sentence. You know exactly how Sentinel works. It followed its license clause. They triggered it themselves." She hesitated. "Can you at least help us restore read access?" "The audit committee is panicking. There's a board review tomorrow." "Send me the request in writing," I said. There was a long pause before she replied. "You really built a fortress, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I built accountability." That evening, I went for a walk near the river, trying to clear my head. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt still. When people think of revenge, they picture chaos. Lawsuits, screaming matches, shattered glass. Mine was quieter. It lived in the fine print no one read, in the lines of code they dismissed as legacy junk. Around 8, my phone buzzed again. A message from one of my former interns, Leah. They're saying the board called an emergency session. Nathan can't recover the audit reports. Richard's blaming IT. People are terrified. I typed one word back. Expected. By morning, things had escalated. The company's quarterly investor presentation was due in 3 hours. The financial data, every number tied to risk and compliance, was locked. I didn't need to be in the building to imagine the panic. The same interns who once fetched coffee were now fielding calls from executives who suddenly couldn't open files. At 9:07 a.m., Marianne called again. Anna, please. The CFO is, well, he's not doing well. The board wants to resolve this. They're asking what it would take to reinstate the license. What it would take, I repeated slowly, is an apology. The same one I was denied. You want Richard to apologize? I want accountability, I said. And I want my consulting rights reinstated under Raven Analytics, LLC. I own it. It's the original contracting entity before I was internalized. Otherwise, Sentinel stays asleep. She didn't argue. I could hear typing in the background. I'll relay that, she said finally. An hour later, social media started whispering. The company's investor call had been postponed due to technical challenges. Stock dipped 4% before lunch. And then, at 2:16 p.m., my phone lit up again. Private number. Anna. Richard's voice cracked through the line. Let's talk. Of course, I said. Just remember, you're the one who wanted a public lesson. He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him swallow his pride through the static. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. We'll fix this. Just tell me what you need. I smiled. Good. Because this isn't about breaking your company. It's about reminding it who built the walls that keep it standing. And for the first time since he'd humiliated me, he said the words I never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry. But I wasn't done yet. Because apologies without change, they're just noise. And I'd spent too many years listening to men like him make noise. The apology came on a Wednesday morning, 30 hours after the company's investor meeting collapsed into silence. Richard called me from his office, his voice steadier than before. Anna, we've reviewed your contract. Legal confirmed the clause. I may have spoken out of turn. May have? I repeated. He sighed. I'm sorry, all right? Let's just fix this. There it was, the apology. Not because he meant it, but because he had no choice. I'm not against fixing things, I said, but I won't just hand Sentinel back for free. I built that system. It's my work. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I want recognition, consulting rights, and a clean exit package, retroactive to the date of my resignation. There was a pause. You're holding us hostage, Anna. I almost laughed. No, Richard. I'm holding you accountable. By the next morning, Marianne reached out to schedule a formal discussion. Off the record, she said. The board is furious. They want this resolved quietly before it reaches investors. You still have the only license key I agreed to meet in person. Neutral ground. A cafe halfway between downtown and the industrial park where the company's office sat like a gray box of glass and ego. When I arrived, Marianne was already there. Laptop open, legal documents scattered across the table. She looked tired, worn thin. I'm not here to fight, she started. But you have to understand, what you're doing, locking an entire compliance system, has consequences. What I did, I said calmly, was follow procedure. The license reverted to me because of Richard's decision. The system isn't locked out of spite. It's locked because the terms changed. She rubbed her forehead. The board won't see it that way. The board can read, I said. Clause 12D has been there since day one. Marianne stared at me for a long moment. Do you know why they're really panicking? I shook my head. Because the SEC is requesting an audit review from your system. They can't generate it without your credentials. If we miss that deadline... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I leaned back. Then it seems we both have incentive to resolve this quickly. She nodded, typing something into her laptop. Here's the proposal. You'll be rehired as a consultant under Raven Analytics LLC, independent status, full control of your framework, compensation, triple your previous salary, retroactive benefits included. In return, you'll restore system access and provide operational continuity. I read the offer slowly. It was more than I expected. Too generous, almost. What's the catch? I asked. Marianne smiled thinly. No catch. Just a confidentiality clause. They don't want the story getting out. I closed the laptop. Tell them to remove that line. I'm not interested in silence anymore. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from old coworkers. Word had spread. They all wanted to know if it was true, that I'd negotiated my way back, that the CFO had been forced to bend. I didn't answer anyone. Not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk, sipping coffee gone cold, staring at the dormant code window on my screen. Sentinel's interface glowed faintly in standby mode. Its heartbeat, a pulsing blue light, still waiting. I'd spent years building that system, line by line, from hotel rooms and late-night audits, through every merger and rebrand. It wasn't just data. It was memory. My memory. And now they wanted it back, pretending they suddenly cared about collaboration. I reopened the contract draft and added one final clause of my own. Raven Analytics reserves full rights to system updates, derivative frameworks, and adaptive integrations created after reinstatement. Any breach of contract or interference with proprietary code will result in immediate license termination without notice. They wanted my system? Fine. But I was making sure they could never erase me again. The next morning, Marianne called to confirm they accepted. Everything's signed. They've wired your consulting fee. You'll receive system access requests from IT within the hour. I thanked her, though I could hear the tension still in her voice. Richard isn't happy, she said quietly. He feels humiliated. He should, I replied. He forgot who built the walls he stands in. When I logged into Sentinel again, it felt like opening a vault that had been sealed for years. Everything was there. Logs, audit trails, compliance maps, all intact. I could have restored full functionality instantly, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd taken for granted. So, I initiated a gradual reactivation. System by system, server by server, each required my manual authorization. It would take days, maybe a week. Just long enough for them to think about what respect really costs. At 11:04 a.m., a Slack message popped up. Nathan. Hey, Anna. Guess we're working together again. No hard feelings, right? I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, hard feelings fade. Consequences don't, he didn't reply. That evening, Marianne called one last time. The board signed the final agreement. You're officially reinstated as a consultant. Congratulations. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Because sometimes justice isn't about revenge or money. It's about correction, about balance, about making sure the people who thought you were disposable finally understand that competence has a backbone. Before I shut my laptop, I opened Sentinel's admin console one last time. The system hummed to life, every line of code like an old friend waking up. At the bottom of the dashboard, a new message appeared automatically, something I'd programmed years ago for moments like this. Integrity is not what you preach. It's what remains when power fades. I smiled. For once, the system and I were perfectly aligned. When I walked back into the office a week later, the building looked exactly the same. Glass walls, gray carpets, that same faint smell of burnt coffee and old toner. but something had shifted. Conversation stopped when I passed. Eyes followed me like I was a ghost returning to claim unfinished business. I wasn't there as an employee anymore. My badge now read consultant, and everyone knew what that meant. Untouchable. Richard didn't greet me. He didn't even look at me when I entered the meeting room. Nathan sat across the table, pretending to check his phone, but the tremor in his hand gave him away. Marianne began briskly, voice steady but careful. We've restored all primary systems. Anna has agreed to assist with a full audit reconciliation before the external review next month. I nodded once. That's correct. I'll be overseeing integrity checks on Sentinel's restored modules. All access changes will go through me. Richard finally looked up. We just need you to make sure it's stable, he said coldly. No surprises. I smiled. Stability depends on how much you've changed since I left. He didn't respond. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Most of the staff avoided direct eye contact. The same people who once laughed with Nathan at my expense now sent overly polite emails filled with thank you and appreciate your help. Guilt has a way of softening even the sharpest tongues. Still, I kept my head down and worked. Every night I stayed late, reviewing logs and comparing old entries against the new data. That's when I started noticing something strange. Hidden among the audit records were unexplained edits, manual overrides entered during the months I was gone. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Transactions flagged as vendor discrepancies had been reclassified as approved exceptions. Dozens of them. At first, I thought it was sloppiness. But when I cross-checked the vendor IDs, they all traced back to one of Nathan's new efficiency initiatives. I opened the change history. Every single override had been done under his admin credentials. I sat back in my chair, pulse slowing. This wasn't incompetence. It was manipulation. The next morning, I walked into Marianne's office. She looked exhausted, surrounded by folders and coffee cups. Do you have a minute? I asked. She gestured to the chair. Always. What's going on? I slid a printed report across her desk. I found these in the audit logs. Unauthorized modifications, all tied to Nathan Holt. She frowned, scanning the pages. Are you sure these weren't system errors from the license transfer? I'm sure, I said. These are manual entries. Look at the timestamps, each done after 11 p.m. That's not batch automation. That's human. Her expression changed. If these are what I think they are, the SEC could see this as data tampering. Exactly, I said quietly, and Richard has no idea. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Anna, this could destroy them. I didn't answer. She already knew where my thoughts were going. That afternoon, I was scheduled for a status update meeting with Richard and Nathan. The room felt colder than usual, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Richard started stiffly. How's the system performing? Flawlessly, I said. But there's something you should see. I turned my laptop toward them, displaying the audit trail on the screen. A neat timeline of every manual edit, every reclassification, each bearing Nathan's digital signature. Nathan's smirk disappeared. That's not what it looks like. Richard blinked. Nathan, what is this? Probably test data, he stammered. You know how these systems can glitch. Glitches don't log user IDs, I said calmly. These were intentional. Richard's face went pale. You're saying my son falsified audit data? I'm saying your son altered regulated financial records, I replied. And the timestamps prove it. Nathan stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're just trying to get back at me. I didn't raise my voice. I don't need revenge, Nathan. I have proof, he stormed out, muttering something under his breath. But Richard stayed seated, staring at the screen. His jaw tightened, his fingers trembling slightly on the table. Finally, he whispered, How bad is it? Bad, I said. Enough to trigger an investigation if anyone outside finds out. He closed his eyes. Can you fix it? Not without leaving a trace, I replied. And not without breaking the law myself. Richard looked up, defeated. Then what do we do? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You do what you should have done from the beginning. Tell the truth. And let me clean it up properly. He stared at me for a long time. Then, quietly, he nodded. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone else left. The building hummed with low fluorescent light, the kind of silence that feels alive. I opened Sentinel one last time, locking Nathan's credentials and preserving the logs in a separate encrypted archive. Not to destroy him, but to protect myself. When I finally shut down my computer, it was past midnight. My reflection in the dark screen looked tired but certain. I wasn't the same woman who'd been ordered to apologize. I was the one they now relied on to save them. And maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all. Watching the people who once dismissed you realize that the foundation they tried to bury you under was the very ground keeping them from collapsing. By Monday morning, the whispers had spread beyond the office. Something about data irregularities, late-night edits, vendor concerns. No one said Nathan's name out loud, but everyone knew. Corporate gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile. Morning, Ms. Keller. Mr. Holt is in early. Of course he was. Panic wakes people up better than coffee. Richard was already in the boardroom, pacing. The lines around his eyes looked deeper, the arrogance gone. On the table lay a printed report, my audit report, open to the page that exposed Nathan's edits. Marianne sat quietly beside him, legal pad in hand. Anna, Richard began, voice rough. Close the door, please. I did. He sank into his chair, exhaling. The board knows. Someone leaked the audit summary. Leaked? I asked carefully. From where? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. What matters is the damage. The SEC wants clarification. I'm meeting with them tomorrow. Marianne glanced up. They're not threatening sanctions yet, but they're watching closely. If they find intent... They will, I interrupted softly. The logs don't lie. Richard rubbed his face with both hands. Nathan swears it was an oversight. I leaned forward. Oversight doesn't explain deliberate overrides. His voice cracked. He's my son, Anna. I nodded. And this is your company. You'll have to choose which one you're willing to lose. Silence filled the room. That afternoon, Nathan showed up at my office door, pale and defiant. You think you've won, don't you? I didn't look up from my screen. There's nothing to win. I'm just doing my job. You could have deleted those logs, he snapped. You didn't have to show them. I finally met his eyes. You're right. I didn't have to. But I also didn't have to cover your mistakes. He laughed bitterly. You think my dad will choose you over me? I think, I said slowly. He's realizing what happens when you build a legacy on shortcuts. For a moment, the confidence drained from his face, replaced by something almost human. Fear. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't follow. The next day, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Marianne insisted I attend as technical advisor. When I entered, the tension was thick enough to taste. Richard sat at the head of the table. Nathan was beside him, eyes down. Across from them were 7 board members and a representative from the external audit firm. The chairwoman spoke first. We've reviewed the preliminary findings. It's clear that unauthorized changes were made to financial audit data. Ms. Keller, can you confirm that these edits were performed using Mr. Nathan Holt's credentials? I nodded. Yes, ma'am. Every entry is time-stamped, verified, and backed up across 3 independent logs. Nathan shifted in his seat. It was a trial process. We were testing a faster classification method. The chairwoman didn't blink. Testing without documentation, without authorization, and within a regulated system? Richard tried to interject, but she raised a hand. Mr. Holt, your leadership allowed this to occur. That's a failure of oversight. He went silent. I kept my tone neutral. I've already prepared a restoration plan to correct the discrepancies. It'll take 2 weeks, but it's recoverable. The chairwoman nodded. We appreciate your diligence, Ms. Keller. As for Mr. Nathan Holt, the board will deliberate on disciplinary action. Nathan's eyes darted to his father. Dad, say something. But Richard didn't. He just stared at the table, shoulders heavy. After the meeting, Marianne caught up with me in the hallway. You handled that well, she said quietly. They'll likely remove Nathan from his role. Richard may step down too. I didn't want this, I said. I know, she replied. But sometimes integrity looks like betrayal to the wrong people. Her words stayed with me. 2 weeks later, the system was stable again. Sentinel purred quietly, its metrics flawless. I'd completed the restoration ahead of schedule, delivered the report, and finalized my consulting payout. On my last day, Richard came to find me. He looked older, defeated, but his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to thank you, he said. You saved this company, even after what I did. I didn't save it, I said. I just stopped it from collapsing under its own lies. He nodded slowly. Nathan's resigned. The board's making it official next week. He's angry, but maybe it's what he needs. I didn't answer. Some lessons cost what they should. He cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The board wants to offer you the role of compliance director. Full authority. No more consultants above you. For a moment, I just looked at him. 12 years ago, I'd have said yes without hesitation. But now? I appreciate it, I said gently. But I've built enough foundations for other people. It's time I build something for myself. He nodded again, understanding more than he wanted to. Good luck, Anna. That evening, I walked out of the building for the second and last time. The sunset hit the glass panels, turning the office gold for a moment before fading back to gray. My phone buzzed. A message from Marianne. You did the right thing. Proud of you. I smiled faintly, then deleted it. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about peace. People like Richard and Nathan will keep rebuilding their towers, patching cracks they can't see. But I'd learned something they never would. Power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from knowing you can walk away. And the system still remembers your name. As I reached the street, I looked back once. The building stood quiet, humming with the same electricity I'd once kept alive. Then I turned and walked toward the city lights, not as an employee, not as a victim, as the architect of my own ending.